Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're really getting into Chapter 6 of Schopenhauer's The Wisdom of Life.
That's right. We're zeroing in on his analysis of the Stoics. It's quite something.
It really is. And we've got, well, three main things we want to unpack for you.
First off, there's this really fascinating Stoic idea, the Logos Spermaticos.
Intriguing name, isn't it? Then we'll look at what Schopenhauer saw as the real essence of the Stoic spirit.
And finally, his pretty sharp critique of how later Stoic ethics were presented, especially by figures like Stobaeus and Arrian.
Yeah, he definitely had strong opinions there. And just a quick heads up, next time we'll be moving on to explore the Neoplatonists.
So stick around for that. But today, it's all Stoics.
Right. We know you're here to get the key insights efficiently and thoroughly. So let's dive into Schopenhauer's perspective on Stoicism.
Okay, let's kick off with the Logos Spermaticos. Schopenhauer calls it a beautiful and pregnant conception. High praise from him.
So what's the core idea? What is this Logos Spermaticos?
Well, think of it as the essential, indestructible part within every member of a species. It's the thing that preserves the species' identical form.
Like passing a blueprint down through generations.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of the seed. The species is embodied in the seed, ensuring it continues even when individual plants or animals or people die off.
Ah, okay. So it's the mechanism, the how, for the species persisting over time, like a kind of almost magical formula, as he puts it, calling the form back into existence again and again.
Precisely. It's about the survival of the type, the species, beyond the individual lifespan.
And Schopenhauer draws a parallel here, doesn't he? With a concept from scholastic philosophy.
He does. He connects it to the forma substantialis. That's the scholastic idea of an inner principle that defines all the qualities of a thing, its very essence.
So how are they similar and how are they different?
Well, they're similar in being about an underlying principle or form, but the Logos Spermaticos specifically applies to living, procreating beings. It's focused on how the individual passes on the species' form.
Whereas the forma substantialis is broader.
Right. It can apply to non-living things, too, and it's more about the inherent nature of a kind rather than the mechanism of transmission. But both, Schopenhauer points out, relate back to Plato's ideas.
Of course, those eternal perfect forms. Makes sense. It's all about that underlying essence versus the temporary instance.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer mentions folks like Sotto Giordano Bruno, and especially Suarez, if you want to dig deeper into that forma substantialis concept. He thought Suarez gave a great overview.
Good to know. Okay, so that's the Logos Spermaticos. Now let's shift gears to how Schopenhauer viewed the spirit of Stoicism itself.
Right. He looks at Stobaeus first. Stobaeus compiled a lot of ethical writings, and Schopenhauer suggests these might even include, actual quotes from the founders, Zeno and Chrysippus.
So a potentially valuable source then.
You think so? But Schopenhauer's assessment is pretty brutal, actually.
Oh, what does he say?
He calls Stobaeus' presentation a pedantic, pedagogic, eminently bald, incredibly empty, flat, and spiritless exposition.
Wow. Okay, so not a fan. Empty, flat, and spiritless. Doesn't leave much room for interpretation.
Not at all. He felt it lacked any real force, any life. No valuable thoughts, nothing striking or noble in his view, just flat.
So why did he think it was so bad?
Right.
What was the fundamental flaw, according to Schopenhauer?
His main criticism is that Stobaeus' ethics seem to be just deduced from abstract concepts, pure ideas, rather than being drawn from, actual reality and lived experience.
Archimedes too.
To what Schopenhauer saw as a really simplistic, unrealistic division of humankind, just not grounded.
And he contrasts this with someone else, doesn't he?
Yes, he contrasts it sharply with Seneca. He talks about the energetic, powerful, and well-thought-out paragraphs of Seneca, suggesting Seneca gives you a much better, more compelling feel for genuine Stoicism.
Interesting. So Stobaeus gets a thumbs down. What about Arrian? He wrote down the teachings of Epictetus, right? How does he fare?
Arrian. Well, Schopenhauer's critical here too, perhaps even more so. He argues that Arrian's dissertations are basically unreliable guides to the true spirit of Stoic ethics.
Unreliable? In what way? Problems with the form, the content?
Both, actually. Let's start with the form, the presentation.
Okay. What bothered him there?
Well, first, he complains about a total lack of method. No systematic approach, no orderly progression of ideas. Just seems all over the place.
Sounds disorganized.
Very. And then there's the repetition. He says Arrian just hammers away endlessly on one point. Indifference to everything that isn't an expression of our own will. The Stoic ataraxia.
That's state of inner peace, tranquility.
Right. But Schopenhauer calls presenting this as the main goal, without properly grounding it in principles, a colossal paradox. He finds it's just asserted, not argued for.
Just repeat it over and over.
Yes, endless declamation, ceaselessly recurring phrases. And Schopenhauer also dislikes the tone. He says Arrian constantly abuses anyone who disagrees with the Stoic maxims. Sort of preachy and aggressive.
Not exactly a calm philosophical discussion, then. He compared it to a sermon, didn't he?
A Capuchin sermon, yes. He also points out the planless and desultory nature chapter headings often don't even match the content that follows. It just jumps around.
Okay, so the structure and style are a mess in Schopenhauer's view.
Yeah.
What about the substance, the actual content?
That's where his critique gets even deeper. He argues the philosophical foundation in Arrian is entirely wanting. He doesn't think it's genuinely Stoic.
Not genuinely Stoic, why not?
He detects what he calls a strong foreign admixture, something non-Stoic mixed in, which he suspects comes from a Christian-Jewish source.
Interesting. What's the evidence for that?
The main thing is the prominent theism. Arrian frequently talks about God as a personal guiding entity. You know, the Stoic acting as God's messenger, devotion to God, hope in God.
But wait, wasn't original Stoicism more pantheistic, God and the world being one?
Exactly Schopenhauer's point. The early Stoa didn't have this concept of a separate, personal God who thinks, wills, commands, provides. That's a totally different picture.
So Schopenhauer saw this theism as a later addition, maybe influenced by the rise of Christianity.
Yes. He suggests it was part of a wider trend among non-Christian writers in the first Christian century. And this mixing of ideas, he argues, leads to major inconsistencies.
How so?
Well, if you introduce this kind of theism, some of the ethical maxims presented by Arrian just don't fit together anymore. They become mutually incompatible, he says. There's no coherent system left.
Okay, I see. What else did he find problematic in Arrian's content?
He also argues Arrian completely misrepresents cynicism.
How does he twist cynicism?
Arrian presents the cynic's purpose as primarily about influencing other people, sort of like being commissioned by God to do so. Schopenhauer says this completely misses the point of the original cynics, who were all about self-sufficiency and radical independence, not trying to convert others.
Any specific examples?
Yeah, the famous one is where Arrian suggests a cynic needs to be healthy and clean, presentable, so they don't repel the very people they're supposed to be influencing for God.
Which totally contradicts the traditional image of the cynic, right?
Yeah.
Disregarding conventional appearances and comfort.
Totally, like Diogenes living in a tub. Cleanliness wasn't exactly top priority. Schopenhauer found that specific point almost comical.
And there was another inconsistency he picked up on, wasn't there? Something about blame?
Yes. He points out the irony, or maybe hypocrisy, that Arrian constantly describes the ideal Stoic as someone who blames no one, complains about nothing.
While the entire tone of Arrian's own writing is quite scolding and judgmental towards anyone who doesn't follow the rules.
Exactly. Schopenhauer finds that contrast pretty ridiculous, as he puts it. The message and the medium are completely at odds.
So overall, a pretty devastating critique of Arrian's dissertations. Did Schopenhauer find anything of value in them?
He does concede a little ground. He acknowledges that buried in there you can still find some genuine Stoic and Cynic thoughts, probably echoes from earlier sources. And he admits Arrian offers some sound common sense at times and some vivid descriptions.
But the overall package?
Diluted, distorted, inconsistent, and fundamentally unstoic in its core theology, according to Schopenhauer.
Now, interestingly, he had a slightly different take on the Enchiridion, or the handbook, which is also associated with Epictetus.
Yes, that's important. He actually didn't think Arrian wrote the Enchiridion. He found its style much better, more spirited, sensible, concise, even friendly. Less of the endless sermonizing.
And the content? Was the theism still there?
Much less so, according to Schopenhauer. He felt the theistic element that bothered him so much in the dissertations was far less prominent in the Enchiridion. He even speculates it might have been Epictetus' own summary. More authentic, perhaps.
Fascinating distinction. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've journeyed through Schopenhauer's look at the Stoics.
We started with his appreciation for that early concept, the Logos Spermaticos, this idea of an enduring species form.
Right. But then we saw his pretty significant criticisms of the later interpretations. He found Stobaeus' account, lifeless and abstract.
In Arrian's presentation of Epictetus, for Schopenhauer, that was a real departure, introducing foreign theistic ideas, lacking structure, full of inconsistencies, basically losing the plot of original Stoicism.
What really stands out is Schopenhauer's insistence that Philosophy needs to be grounded in reality, in experience, not just spun out of abstract concepts.
Definitely. He felt that later Stoicism, particularly in Arrian's version, lost that grounding and got tangled up in ideas that just didn't fit the original Stoic framework.
Which leaves us with a really interesting question for you, the listener, to ponder. How do philosophical ideas change over time? When people interpret and reinterpret them, what gets lost, what gets added?
Yeah, and what factors might lead to what Schopenhauer saw as a kind of dilution or distortion? Is it inevitable? Or maybe think about this. How much should philosophy rely on lived experience versus abstract reason? Where's the right balance?
Lots to think about there. And remember, our philosophical journey continues. Next time, as we mentioned, we'll be diving into the Neoplatonists.
We hope you'll join us then as we keep exploring these big ideas.
Follow on YouTube and Spotify.